It's finally here. The update, the final iteration of the February updates. Now, they promise us that they're going to be working on later mech stuff, better gameplay 2, dose. We continue to improve gameplay with adjustments to heroes and a reworked reserve system. I don't recall them teasing the reserve system update, so new heroes field of view and revival. There are another two key community suggestions that we are happy to now implement. You can now use infantry and foot heroes to revive heroes from allied teams. So that's a 2v2, 3v3. You can now wake up your teammates' heroes. Furthermore, the fog of war revealed by unconscious heroes has now been reduced to prevent them from being used to spy on enemies while still allowing you to easily find them on screen and the minimap. That was a weird one. That was a weird thing that you are able to see with their unconscious body anyways, like highlighted, glowing, like revealed. Couldn't they just have like the symbol and like weapon caches and stuff like that? You can see them and see when they disappear, even through the fog of war. Why wouldn't they just have that? I don't know why heroes reveal fog of war anyways, but they nerfed it a little bit, but it's still there. Reserves reworked. Look at that. The reserve costs are different. And there's only 2. Thanks to all your recent feedback, we are ready to rework the reserve system. This update aims to increase the variety of viable loadouts and encourage players to opt for having units in both reserves. Before, it was just way too economic to overload one reserve. From the data, it is clear that reserves have a huge impact on the game and are often the deciding factor. We want to reduce this on the games while maintaining the wow factor once it hits. Here's how, people. The cost of a reserve in-game now depends on which specific units it contains. This cost is still cheaper than building them normally through the barracks or workshop. Makes sense. I've seen this one suggested. That this suggestion makes total sense. Reserve slots now have been reduced from 3 to 2. Reserve coins have been reduced from 6 to 5. Exo Suits, Strasnik, Grimbark, and Ognivos can now only be picked in Reserve 2. Instead of at least one advanced building and a basic building, deploying Reserve 2 now requires one advanced building or 2 basic buildings. Deploying an empty reserve costs 100 iron. It will still grant the player plus 25 maximum population capacity. This is a huge one. This means that we're going to have a much easier time. Players will have a much easier time economically getting to that 50 supply, that late game builds, right? The full composition, much cheaper, much easier to get to. Because before, the only time you would get that empty reserve for the 5 pop was if you're like, we're ahead. If you're like really far ahead and you couldn't build and you had a ton of money to spend. I like this, changing the build order or the requirements for getting your R2 now means that there's way more options for your builds. Because before you had to go barracks, advanced barracks, and then workshop. And that was it. You would always do that. That was required if you wanted the fastest possible Reserve 2. Now having the options for 2 basic or 1 advanced gives you more, potentially gives more viability to different style builds. To go barracks and then workshop and have that flow into your build potentially. Exo Suits, these all got nerfed technically, going to R2, but maybe not technically, because if everything costs relative to what it is, I guess it doesn't really matter what reserve. I guess it's still technically a nerf because you need to build 2 buildings now, or get the advanced if you want to get those mechs that used to be in R1. I guess not the Ognivos. Those are always. Or no, what the heck is the Ognivos? Wasn't that already in R2? Isn't this the Ogni? Oh, never mind. I'm confused. The Ogni was in R1. Forgive me. How embarrassing. Good thing no one is watching. Reserve coins have been reduced from 6 to 5. Makes sense. The overall, the from 3 to 2 slots and 6 to 5, and these mechs being moved into R2 is this everything. The reserve is being nerfed, and I think that made and I think it made sense because it had too big of an impact. Reserves have a huge impact, and people were complaining about infantry harvest. Infantry base gameplay was too strong, too viable, and that not enough mechs were being built, and they blamed the infantry for it. I think it was really more of a reserve issue because getting your reserve, especially your R2 out, gave you all the mechs and the firepower you really needed to do damage, like significant damage, especially if your opponent either didn't go R2 or was late to getting it. And so you wouldn't need to build big mechs because your reserve 2 would kill your opponent outright. That may not be the case anymore, significantly lowering the firepower of reserves. Basically forcing players to have to get the advanced workshop to do big mech stuff now. You can't get a whole lot of big mechs without the workshop now, which is good. I think we're going to see more mechs because of this entirely. And I mean, this is a huge change. Huge change. This changes all like so much of the meta again. The whole meta is now is bonkers wonky now because everything's different. Yeah, we'll have to see how this works out. I think there's a lot more options now for interesting builds and viable strategies, and potentially giving space for tier 1 mechs, light mechs, to have a place to shine potentially. We recent improved response times between issuing orders and units undertaking them, and it's been encouraging to hear that many players can notice the difference. Definitely. The ability to dodge grenades is so much better now. Response times have been roughly halved, resulting in slicker gameplay. So there's February highlights. Is this all the changes? Was that all the changes? More accolades? Okay, here are the general changes. So those are the big changes, right? I guess the reserve change was the big one. The AI now spends the same amount of coins as though available to the player. The Rusviet Nagans and Polonius Termex chrome skins have returned to cosmetic screens as intended. Okay. Prevented destroyer cannons from firing at targets that have been displayed in the fog of war. Fixed a few instances where larger mechs would fall through the terrain. Oh my goodness. Has anyone actually experienced that? I haven't. I have like 150 hours in the game, most of it in multiplayer. I've never seen that. We'll keep an eye out for more of these. Is there just like a bottomless pit filled with mechs somewhere in that Iron Harvest ether? Enemy buildings within the campaign are correctly described in their tooltip. Okay, fix an issue that caused game freezes to occur in both single-player skirmishes and multiplayer matches around 10 minutes. I've never encountered that, but that's always good. More bug fixes is always better. Fix an issue that would cause checksum errors on older machines. Nice. Fix an issue that prevented the resources displaying more from correctly updating. The resource display from correctly updating when building an HQ in campaign missions. Never noticed it, but that's cool. Balance changes. Okay, here we go. Since the last update, we've observed that the infantry changes had a lot of impact on the game's progression. Mechs are closer to the state that we want them to be, and so we've decided to refrain from modifying them all and tuned back the infantry buff. Interesting. I was talking about this on my stream where this month's update, especially the last one and this one now, is going to reveal sort of the mentality and where the developers are, so like headspace wise, with how they want the game to look and feel. And if they're happy with how the mechs are, with the mechs being sort of something to be deeply desired and sought after, and with a stronger early game leading into a stronger leading into what might be considered a weaker late game, they're happy with it so far. But they are nerfing the infantry buff. Makes sense. Gunners have now been moved from the barracks to the advanced barracks in order to make the counter for early mechs more difficult. Huge. Gunners are so good. Gunners have been so good for so long. Even just like having one gunner, even though you're like infantry versus infantry, the gunners, because of their knockdown, can provide just and they're 750 health. They're like tanks. They're like tanks providing crowd control effects. They're CC. It's like an MMORPG going on here. And one issue is, gunners are the counter to light mechs. They do great against them. One gunner, two gunners versus any light mech, kills it. With a little bit of micro and management or having cover, the gunners kill mechs, light mechs so easily. Now, the meta has been barracks, advanced barracks almost immediately, skipping an iron upgrade. That's pretty aggressive for an aggressive early game play. So this change doesn't make a huge difference in that, because one big counter to the concept of going workshop first or going light mechs quickly was that with the advanced barracks upgrade, you can spam gunners for super cheap. Super cheap. And this doesn't really fix that, because you would typically go engineer, barracks, oil upgrade, advanced barracks. And you can get that like around 5 minutes, which is around the time potentially like a light mech might be getting onto the field, or by the time a light mech is reaching the front lines, basically. So by the time you can get an advanced barracks, you have the option, the counter, the immediate counter to light mech. So this doesn't really fix gunners preventing light mech gameplay, like at all. But it does force, like, I guess if you try to go barracks first and then try to do something greedy, I guess, I don't know, barracks first and then upgrades, just to economy, to get the maximum amount of economy, and then advanced barracks without building any infantry. Because this could punish that if you go light mechs against it, but it's a nerf to gunners, but not a huge nerf, really. Unless gunners don't get the discount. I guess that makes a little bit more sense. Gunners don't have the discount now, I imagine. Gunners will be at the, what they were before, price-wise. Was it $275 or something? Okay, that makes a little more sense. If the gunner's price is not reduced now with the advanced barracks, that makes more sense as well. Having gunners on the field to fight light mechs, though, is not going to be an issue still. Advanced barracks unit cost reduction has been readjusted. Engineers, riflemen, stormtroopers, vanguards, grenadiers, medics, and flamethrowers are cheaper when built through the advanced barracks compared to the normal barracks. Engineers' costs increase from 100 to 125. Seems fair. Rifleman, stormtrooper, vanguard costs 125 to 175. Seems fair. Grenadier cost increase from 150 to 200. Seems fair. Flamethrower cost increased from 150 to 200. Probably not fair. The flamethrower was not good at 150. You did not build a flamethrower when it was discounted. You're not going to build it now with a less discount. People were not building flamethrowers. Did you see flamethrowers getting built all the time? Definitely not. And if you did you win? I hope so. Yeah. So I think this makes sense for Grenadier, the Riflemen, and the Engineers. That all makes sense. The Flamethrowers, though, I think could have stayed where they were. Honestly, because the Flamethrowers still are just not a viable unit. Mortar systems. Compared to Polonia's and Saxony's artilleries, the mortar weapon system couldn't hold their ground or find a role to fill. By comparison, their inferior range was now compensated for by more damage potential, especially against larger groups of enemies. Now, this is interesting because, you can get a mortar system way sooner than the two artilleries in the workshop. But yeah, damage against unarmored increased from 50 to 65. Damage against light mechs increased from 93 to 100. Against medium, 80 to 100. Against heavy, 67 to 100. Explosion radius increased from 1.5 to 4. Outer explosion radius increased from 4 to 6. Outer explosion radius damage modifier increased from 0.2 to 0.4. This is a fraction. So when you hit damage a unit, and that unit is not in the direct shot, that unit's in the splash, it's going to take 40% of 65, or whatever the damage is. So like a light mech will get hit for 40 points of damage if it's in the splash, as opposed to the 100. The chances of it getting hit by the splash is much greater. So this is interesting. This is a cool buff. You just wouldn't really see the mortar system or any of the weapon systems, except for the field cannon. One, because they're so slow. They're all pretty expensive. And though, you wouldn't like build a mortar. If you're in the need of artillery, you would just eventually get one of these two. And you wouldn't get Polonia's because Polonia's mortar is artillery system is horrible. The Moxney, Polonia's mech, for artillery is not good. Don't buy it. Saxony's though is great. You would never really use the mortar system in lieu of the Saxony. And I don't really recall ever being in a position where like, oh man, I need a mortar earlier. Now I think the mortar is a underutilized unit. It's so great in fights. So great in fights. And it's hard to use, hard to get to the fight. Because it's so slow. If it's out of position, you get punished. But this is kind of cool. I think we might see more mortars, especially mortars in the reserve. We might see more mortars in the reserve. Are you going to build more mortars? Probably not. Probably not. But again, even though this potentially does not make the mortar a meta viable unit, that's okay because making changes like this to buff a unit or to rework a unit gives people ideas, makes people go, huh, maybe I will build a mortar. Maybe I will build a flamethrower, even though the flamethrower still sucks and it's not worth it. It wasn't worth it at 150, so it's not going to be worth it at 200. People still might go, hey, you know what? I'm going to build a flamethrower, see how it feels. Work on a flamethrower build. So this is cool. So I do think the mortar is sort of an unsung hero, and maybe it'll get its time to shine now. So there's way more damage, and also way more viability into the late game. 100, 100, 100. The mortar is a great unit to transition into the late game with. If you can keep it alive, get it veterancy, get it elite, could be a great little tool to have one mortar in your build, both for defense and offense. So that's kind of cool. The Serp, the sickle mech, the scythe. Against high school players, this monstrosity would not effectively reach their targets. Increased HP should help it survive long enough to inflict damage. It's true. You just get kited. Like this right here, the scythe versus the Wotan. The Wotan, the Wonton. Because the Wonton's pretty fast, and it's got really long range. So if you just shoot and kite, shoot and back up, this guy would never reach his target. It was sort of like a flamethrower in that sense, where like, if you just micro against a flamethrower, it does no damage. It does sort of break up the line, though. Walking a flamethrower in forces the opponent to leave their cover, leave their position, because otherwise they would take a bunch of damage. Same thing. Maybe you have one of these to charge in, to scatter units, break it up, and then you can plan from there. And this makes that same strategy just more viable. So this is cool. I don't think we're going to see a lot more sickle mechs, but maybe. Saxony. Prince Wilhelm, his lay waste ability, now has a good portion of its former glory restored. Bring back the brr, while still using an appropriate fire rate. To make him more worthy of the Kaiser and better able to survive long enough to menace other mechs, we have increased his resilience. Also, don't be mistaken by the flat damage values below. The increased area of effect of each bullet also contributes to more damage output. Interesting. Increases HP from 650 to 700. Nice. This is the big one, though. Medium armor to heavy. That's big. That's important. Because before, he sort of felt like the squishy backline caster DPS. But his abilities didn't really have a whole lot of range. This will make it much easier for him to get in, cast his abilities, get out. So pretty cool. Splash radius increased from 1.5 to 2.5 for lay waste. Lay waste damage versus unarmored increased to 50, 40 to 50. Versus light, 20 to 30. Medium, 15 to 30. Heavy armor, 10 to 20. Versus structure, 7 to 15. It already did a ton of damage. It's going to do more tons of damage. So this is great. Prince William, not really a meta hero, but I just like the design of him because he was like this all of his utility, all of his DPS, all of his viability for the prince was in his two abilities. And this is going to make it easier for him to get in, to use them, and to have impact. So that's cool that we have a hero that all of his value sits in his two abilities. Where like Lek, he's got decent abilities, but his real value is his damage per punch and his attack rate. Like he attacks pretty fast and does a lot of damage per hit. So like Lek's, I think, value rests in his auto attack, where like if he can get on his health too, he's like super durable. If you can get Lek on top of something, it's dead, Where this guy, if you can get him in a range of his abilities, they're dead, and then he has to wait. So I like that difference in heroes, that each hero should have its own like niche and sort of end play style. The Gatling mech, the Grimbart, the box with a gun. Eat your heart out, Gladys. The Chonky Boy now suppresses targets and is more effective against groups of enemies. Interesting. How does the suppression work? Suppression added to its main weapon. Its sweep ability as suppression value in the area has been increased. Interesting. Because to me, this always seemed like this unit sort of shot one model at a time. But I guess the suppression will be applied to the whole squad, even as one model is getting killed. Mechs and Exosuit reserve coin costs have been adjusted as well. The Grimbart and Eisenhahn now cost 1 coin each, because they're in the R2. Isengram and the Erlkönig. This is artillery. Don't at me about my German. Now cost 2 coins. It used to cost 1. The Wotan and the Stiff Mutter now cost 3. These are the big boy mechs. Polonia. The Loka and the Zol cost 3 coins. They used to cost 2. Smiley and Machny, this is the artillery, cost 2 coins. They both used to cost 1. The Stratsnik and the Exo Suits cost 1 coin. I think all this makes sense, right? Nagan and the Serp cost 3. The Kolakol, the Kola, and the Nak, this is the artillery, cost 2. Groza and the Agni cost 1. I think these all make sense. Very clearly tiered now. All the tier 1 mechs cost 1. All of like the mechs that cost 1 before and the R2 now cost 2, and the big boy mechs all cost 3. Makes sense. I don't know. I would almost feel like the Smiley is on the same level as the Stratsnik as far as like potential use, but I don't know. There's a lot of utility. I think there's a lot of value in the Smiley that people haven't discovered yet. Maybe the devs already know that, because you don't really see Smileys. They're hard to use. You have to keep them constantly under your eye because they can just quickly run to their death. But yeah, the battlefield is refreshed and waiting for the newest strategies that form a versatile commander. That could be you. That's you. I think they're talking to you there. Yeah. All right. That's about it. Now we're just waiting for the update for March. I think overall these are all good changes, huge changes. They sort of promised like bigger mech changes. I think people are waiting for like mech buffs or like cheap cost reduction on the mechs. This is really more. The story here is really more about the reserve rework. That's going to change the meta and potentially see how mechs are fit into the gameplay. And the Wilhelm buff, great. Love Wilhelm. Somebody call Bobito. Bobito's going to be real happy about that. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. That's about it. Hopefully, we'll see more mechs in the late game. Maybe a phase for the light mechs, and I think early game infantry is still going to be strong. All right, thank you guys for watching. Appreciate it.